the coldest $20 she ever spent. There's a particular kind of loneliness that money makes worse. Not better, worse. I want you to understand that before we go any further, because everything that follows depends on it. Arthur Hale knew this better than most men alive. He was 74 years old, the sole founder of Hale Hospitality Group, a company that operated 41 hotels across 19 states and had been valued, at its peak, at just over $3 billion. He had shaken hands with senators, eaten dinner with 2 sitting presidents, and once received a handwritten birthday card from a Supreme Court justice. His name was on a wing of Northwestern University's business school. His photograph hung in the lobby of every Hale hotel, printed in soft black and white, the way old photographs always look like they were taken in a better era. He was sitting on a milk crate outside a sandwich shop on North Milwaukee Avenue in Wicker Park, wearing a coat he had purchased specifically for the occasion at a Goodwill on Western Avenue, a brown wool overcoat missing 2 buttons with a collar that smelled faintly of someone else's cigarettes. His shoes were scuffed work boots, 1 size too large. He had a paper coffee cup in front of him, empty except for 3 quarters and a dime. He had been doing this for 4 consecutive Tuesday afternoons, always from 4 o'clock until 6:30, always on this same block, always this same milk crate he kept in the trunk of the car his driver Marcus parked 2 streets over. In 4 Tuesdays, a total of 11 people had stopped. 2 dropped coins without looking at him. 1 woman set down a granola bar and walked quickly away. A teenager in a Northwestern hoodie crouched down, held out a $5 bill and said, "God bless you, sir," in a voice rehearsed enough to belong to a church youth group. The others kept walking, eyes forward, AirPods in, the full armor of a city that had learned not to see. Arthur did not do this to be cruel. He did it because Eleanor had asked him to. Not directly, not in words she had spoken to his face, but in the journal she left behind, the slim green notebook with the cracked spine that he had found 8 months after she died, tucked inside a first edition copy of Mary Oliver's poetry on the 3rd shelf of her reading room. He had only found 1 page that seemed addressed to him directly. The rest was her inner life, private and luminous, and he had read no further than that single page. It said, in Eleanor's precise, slightly left-leaning handwriting, "Arthur, if you are reading this, you are probably still measuring people. Stop. Go somewhere ordinary and let someone surprise you. The one who stays, that's the one worth building something with." He had read it 17 times in 2 years. He still wasn't entirely sure what she meant, but he understood enough to try. This was his trying. The December light was failing early, the way it always does in Chicago when winter comes in from the lake with its shoulders up. The temperature had dropped to 19 degrees since he sat down. Arthur pulled the coat tighter and let his chin sink toward his chest, watching the sidewalk traffic through the gap between his collar and his hat brim. A man in an expensive parka crossed quickly, briefcase swinging. A young couple walked past hand in hand, the woman laughing at something on her phone. A delivery driver locked his bicycle to the pole 6 feet away and disappeared through a door without glancing over. He was thinking about going back to the car. Then he heard her before he saw her. "Mija, stay close to me, it's cold. Don't touch that, the railing's probably frozen." She came around the corner from Honorary Street at a pace that was not quite rushing, but never entirely stopped. The specific walk of a woman who had too many things to carry and too few hands to carry them. She had a canvas tote bag on one shoulder, a backpack on the other, and a small girl, perhaps 6 years old, gripping the hem of her jacket with both fists and trying to match her stride. The woman was in her late 20s, dark-haired, wearing a parka that had seen at least 4 winters, a thin scarf looped twice around her neck. Her work ID badge was still clipped to her jacket, a hospital badge, the photo too small for Arthur to read from this distance, but the teal lanyard said, "Cook County Health," in white letters. She was not looking at him. Then she was. It wasn't pity that made her stop. That was the first thing Arthur registered. and he had become expert at reading the texture of how people looked at him when they stopped. Pity had a particular quality, a slight softening around the eyes that tightened again almost immediately into relief that the suffering belonged to someone else. This woman didn't do any of that. She stopped the way you stop when you recognize something. A brief, specific stillness. She said something under her breath in Spanish that Arthur didn't catch, then crouched down to the little girl's level. "Wait, right here. Don't move from this spot, okay? Right here." She pointed firmly at the pavement. The little girl nodded with the solemn gravity of a child who has learned that her mother means what she says. The woman straightened and walked into the sandwich shop. Arthur waited. This part often told you everything. Some people went inside, thought better of it, and came out with nothing, the impulse already spent. But 4 minutes later, he counted habit. She came out with a large paper cup of soup, the steam rising visibly in the cold air, and a small bag of crackers rubber-banded to the side. She walked directly to him and held it out. "Here," she said. "It's chicken noodle. I don't know if you like chicken noodle, but it was the hottest thing they had. And it's a good soup, not the canned kind. They make it themselves." Arthur looked up. This close, he could see that she was tired. Not the temporary tiredness of a long day, but the structural kind that lives in the bones and the spaces under the eyes. She had smile lines that showed even when she wasn't smiling, and her hands, wrapped around her own jacket cuffs for warmth, were chapped at the knuckles. "Thank you," he said. He kept his voice at the register he'd practiced. Rougher, slower, the voice of a man who didn't talk much anymore. She sat down. Not beside him on the milk crate, there wasn't room, but on the stoop step 2 feet to his left, pulling the little girl down next to her by gentle instinct, the child tucking immediately under her arm. Arthur had not expected this. In 4 Tuesdays, no one had sat down. "This is Lucia," the woman said, nodding at the child. "She won't bother you. She's just tired from school." She paused. "I'm Maya." "Walter," Arthur said. The name he'd chosen for this particular coat and this particular milk crate felt less strange each time he said it. Maya nodded as though Walter were a perfectly complete answer. She was quiet for a moment, watching the street, and Arthur had the peculiar sensation of sitting beside someone who was entirely comfortable with silence. Not the performed silence of someone waiting for the right moment to speak, but the real kind. The kind people who carry a lot inside them learn to cultivate. "I had the worst day," she said, finally. Not to him, exactly. More the way you might say it to a street corner or to the city in general. Not bad like anything went wrong. Just bad like everything took twice as long as it should have, and I forgot to eat lunch, and Lucia had a stomachache during second period, and I had to leave work for 2 hours to get her, and then go back. And now I have to go back tomorrow and explain to a supervisor who already thinks I take too many personal days. Arthur held the soup cup in both hands and let the warmth travel through the wool of his gloves. "That's a full day," he said. "It's a Tuesday," Maya said, with a short, dry laugh that meant all my Tuesdays look like this. "You know what the worst part is? I had a 20. I was saving it. Lucia needs—" She stopped, glanced down at the child who had closed her eyes, lowered her voice. "She's had this cough for 10 days. I was saving the 20 for the pharmacy tonight. The store-brand cough syrup is like $8, but I wanted to get the real kind, the one with the right ingredient, because it works faster and she has school tomorrow. So the soup was $12. She said it without any drama, as a simple fact, which means I'll get the store brand tonight and hope for the best. She paused. "I'm not telling you that so you feel bad. I don't know why I told you that." She looked briefly sideways at him with an expression that was self-aware and slightly rueful. "Sorry. I unload on strangers sometimes. My friend says I should be a bartender." Arthur looked at her. He had spent 50 years reading people across conference tables and dinner tables and negotiating tables, and in that time he had developed a sense for the specific texture of human authenticity, the quality that couldn't be rehearsed or manufactured, the thing that remained when self-interest and performance were stripped away. It was uncommon enough that he noticed it distinctly when he encountered it, the way you notice a particular quality of light. Maya Reyes had it, unmistakably and entirely. He thought about Eleanor's handwriting, the one who stays. She stayed another 7 minutes. They talked about the cold, about whether the city had any business dropping below 20 degrees before Christmas, about Lucia's teacher, who apparently sang during maths class, and whether that was inspired or deranging. Maya drank a small coffee she'd kept in her tote bag and shared crackers with the sleeping child, and did not once ask Arthur for anything or about anything that would suggest she thought of him as anything other than an old man on a milk crate who was also having a Tuesday. When she stood to leave, she tucked the remaining crackers under the lip of his coffee cup so they wouldn't blow away. "Stay warm, Walter," she said. "Seriously, if you need, there's a warming centre on Division, about 6 blocks east. They're good people there." She told him about a warming centre, a place she thought he might actually need. Arthur watched her walk away, the child half awake now and dragging slightly on her arm. He watched until they turned the corner onto Honoré and disappeared into the ordinary dark of the neighbourhood. He sat very still for another 2 minutes, the soup warm in his hands. Then he looked down at the coffee cup, at the 3/4 and the dime that was still there, untouched. Maya had not taken a single cent, had not glanced at the cup, had not made any gesture toward it at all. In his coat pocket was a folded piece of paper, a photograph, printed from a digital file, of Eleanor at approximately the same age Maya was now, standing on a beach in Maine in 1981, laughing at something off camera. The same dark hair, the same particular way of standing with the weight slightly forward, as though always ready to move towards something. He didn't take the photograph out. He didn't need to. That night, back in his suite on the 14th floor of the Hale Grand Chicago, he sat in the leather chair by the window and looked at the city lights without turning on any other lights in the room. His phone was on the side table. He picked it up and called a number from memory. "Marcus," he said when his long-time attorney answered. "I need to see you this week. Not at the office. Come to the apartment." There was a brief pause. Marcus Webb had been Arthur Hale's personal attorney and, in the careful, boundaried way of men who have worked together for 3 decades, something approaching a friend. He knew when to ask questions and when not to. "Thursday work?" Marcus said. "Thursday works," Arthur said. He paused. "And Marcus, pull Eleanor's full estate file, the original documents, all of them." He hung up and looked at the city and thought about a woman who had spent her last $20 on soup for a stranger and then told him where to go to stay warm. And he felt something shift somewhere deep in his chest, something that had been calcified for 11 years beginning, in the manner of old stone and slow water, to crack. In the drawer of his bedside table, beneath a phone charger and a packet of antacids, there was a small brooch, silver, shaped like a flowering branch, with 3 seed pearl centers. Eleanor had worn it on her winter coats for 30 years. He had carried it with him every day since the funeral, in the way people carry things when they don't know what else to do with a grief that has no address to be sent to. He opened the drawer and looked at it for a long time. "The one who stays," Eleanor had written. For the first time in years, Arthur Hale thought that maybe he understood. If you're watching from somewhere cold tonight, whether that's the weather or something else, I'm glad you're here. Drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from. And if this story is already hitting close to home, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. I promise you'll want to be here for what comes next. What she never asked for. The thing about watching someone from a distance is that you begin to love what you see before you know whether you have the right to. I'm not sure Arthur would have used the word love. He would have said respect or interest or something measured and contained that kept the feeling at arm's length. But I think love is the right word, or the beginning of it, the fragile, uncertain kind that grows in people who have been without it long enough to forget what it costs. He found out her full name through a building management company. Not the invasive way. He didn't hire anyone to dig into her life. He simply asked the owner of the sandwich shop, who knew her as a regular, and said, "That's Maya. She lives up in the Flores building on Honoré, in the easy way of neighborhoods where people still know each other's first names and building names." The Flores building was a 6-story walk-up with a leaking radiator on the second floor that the super had been promising to fix since October. Arthur knew this because 3 weeks after the Tuesday on the milk crate, he presented himself at the building's management office as one Walter H. Crane, a recently widowed retiree looking for a quiet one-bedroom close to the L. He paid 3 months in advance in cashier's checks, which the building manager accepted with the uncomplicated gratitude of a man who was used to complicated tenants and simple money. His driver Marcus thought this was, at minimum, unusual. "You're going to live in a 6-story walk-up in Wicker Park," Marcus said, on the drive from the Hale ground to the new apartment, which was on the 4th floor, 2 doors down from Maya's. "I'm going to spend time there," Arthur said. "There's a difference. At 74, the stairs are good for my heart." Marcus said nothing for a moment. Then, "Does Derek know about this?" Arthur looked out the window. "Derek knows what I choose to tell him, which, lately, has been very little." This was not cruelty on Arthur's part, though it would have looked like it from outside. It was the particular kind of protective distance that develops between two people who love each other in ways that have become incompatible. A father who showed love through provision, a son who had come to understand love as a form of entitlement, and a long, quiet rupture that neither of them had ever named out loud. Derek Hale was 46 years old, handsome, competent, and absolutely certain that the company his father had built existed primarily as his inheritance. He ran the company's eastern operations with efficiency and no particular warmth. He was not monstrous. He was simply a man who had learned from his father that love and money were the same thing, and who had never been corrected on this point until far too late. Arthur moved into the Flores building on a Thursday. By the following Sunday, he had met Maya in the hallway. She didn't recognize him. He had not expected her to. The milk crate, the hat brim, the collar, the specific invisibility of an old man in a bad coat. Here, in the building's narrow 4th-floor hallway, he was simply a compact, silver-haired man in a decent cardigan, carrying a paper grocery bag. And she was Maya Reyes, carrying a slightly smaller paper grocery bag and trying to hold the stairwell door open with her hip while her daughter squeezed through below her arm. "Here," Arthur said, and held the door. "Oh, thank you," Maya said, with the automatic, genuine warmth of someone who thanks people not because she was taught to, but because she means it. She looked at him the way you look at a new neighbor, brief, friendly, filing away for future reference. "Are you in 4C? I heard someone moved in." "Walter Crane," he said. "Yes, 4C. "Maya Reyes," she said. 4E. "This is Lucia." Lucia, face half hidden behind her mother's arm, performed a small wave. "Let me know if you need anything. The radiator in the hallway is a little temperamental. It clicks at 2 in the morning, but you get used to it." "I'll keep that in mind," Arthur said. He watched her open her door and disappear inside. Through the door, briefly, he heard a television, something warm and Spanish language, and the smell of something cooking with garlic and cumin drifted into the hallway before the door closed. He stood there for a moment with his grocery bag. Then he went inside his own apartment, a single bedroom, a living room with one window that overlooked the alley, a kitchen where the linoleum curled at the corner by the refrigerator, and sat down on the chair he had brought from the hotel, because it was the only thing in this apartment he intended to keep permanently. He put the grocery bag on the table and looked at the room. He had not lived somewhere this size since 1973. It was quieter than the hotel. The walls were thin enough that he could hear, faintly, through the shared wall with the next apartment, the television switching channels and then going off. And then, much more faintly, the sound of a child being read to, or reading, he couldn't tell which, the cadence rising and falling in the particular music of a story being told out loud. Arthur sat in the chair and listened until it stopped. And then he sat in the quiet. He had not had quiet like this in years. The hotels were beautiful and still lonely in the way that beautiful places built for other people's comfort are always lonely when you live in them. This quiet was different. It was full of other people's life sounds, the radiator's click at 2 a.m, a neighbour's television, a child's voice through the wall. And it was, he realised with some surprise, the least alone he had felt in 11 years. The weeks settled into a rhythm that Arthur had not anticipated and could not entirely explain. He and Maya crossed paths 3 or 4 times a week, in the hallway, in the building's small laundry room, occasionally in the mornings when she was leaving for the hospital, and he was returning from the 6-block walk he had begun taking every morning because the stairs were, in fact, good for his heart. She was consistently friendly and consistently busy, the specific combination of warmth and forward motion that defines a person whose kindness has never had the luxury of being leisurely. She learned that he was a widower. This was true. She learned that he was retired, technically true, in the sense that he no longer went into the office daily. She learned that he had a son he didn't talk to much, and this she received with a short nod that suggested it was a category of human experience she understood without needing elaboration. He learned that she worked 2 jobs. The hospital ID badge she still wore most evenings turned out to be for a part-time administrative position at Cook County Health's records department. And she also did 2 morning shifts a week doing food cart prep at a deli on Chicago Avenue. He learned that she had come to Chicago at 19 from El Paso with $60 in her pocket and a cousin's address on a piece of paper, and that the cousin had moved to Milwaukee 3 months later, and that Maya had stayed. He learned that Lucia's father was not in the picture and had not been for 4 years, and that Maya did not speak of this with bitterness, but with the flat, settled tone of someone who has made peace with a fact that will never stop being a fact. He learned that she had a habit of leaving small notes for neighbours when she made too much food. A sticky note on the hallway door handle, a Tupperware of soup or rice or beans with a handwritten label. He received these 3 times in 2 months. He always returned the containers clean, without comment, because he understood instinctively that she gave without wanting acknowledgement, and that acknowledging it too effusively would change the nature of the thing. He also began to understand, in the measured and slightly wary way he understood everything, that he was watching someone live well under conditions designed to make that difficult, and that this was either the most ordinary thing in the world or the least ordinary, depending on the angle. It was a Tuesday in late February when she asked him the question. She had knocked on his door to return a book he had lent Lucia, a picture book about migratory birds that he had happened to mention one morning and that Lucia had apparently requested to borrow with considerable urgency. Maya stood in the doorway with the book under one arm and a look on her face that suggested she had something else to say and wasn't sure if she should say it. "Come in," Arthur said. She sat at the kitchen table while he made coffee, instant, the kind she would later tease him about, though with the precise fondness that made teasing into affection. Lucia was with a neighbour downstairs for an hour. The apartment was quiet. "Walter," Maya said, after a pause during which he could see her deciding something. "Can I ask you something kind of personal?" "You can try," he said. "Who was the most important woman in your life?" He turned from the counter, cup in hand. She was looking at him directly, not unkindly, with the specific candor of someone who asks the questions most people avoid, because she has learned that the questions people avoid are usually the ones that matter. Arthur sat down across from her. He thought about how to answer this and decided with some certainty that there was only one true answer. "My wife," he said. "Eleanor." Maya waited. She was... He stopped. He pressed his thumb against the rim of the coffee cup. She was the kind of person who noticed things. Not big things, small things. The way a room felt when you walked into it. What someone needed before they said it. She had a quality, I don't know a better word for it than attention. She paid attention to the world in a way that made people feel like the world was paying attention back. He paused. I didn't appreciate it when she was alive. Not sufficiently. I was busy building things that I thought mattered more. Maya was quiet for a moment. Do you have kids? One son, Arthur said. We're not close. She nodded slowly. My mum says the hardest thing about loving someone is accepting that they can't love you back in the way you need. That doesn't mean they don't love you, just that they don't know how. Arthur looked at her. That's wise. She's been through a lot, Maya said, with a small smile that was entirely love. There was a noise downstairs and she stood. But at the door, she paused and turned back with the look of someone who had decided something while standing up. I think Eleanor sounds like someone worth being lonely for, she said. I mean that as a compliment. To both of you. She was gone before he could answer. He sat at the kitchen table for a long time after, in the particular silence of a man who has just heard a true thing said out loud. He called Marcus Webb on a Friday evening in early March, speaking quietly by the window, the city below lit orange and grey in the evening. I want to revise the trust documents, he said, specifically the secondary beneficiary designation. Marcus was quiet for a moment that had professional weight in it. Arthur, I know what you're going to say. I'm going to say that Derek will contest anything that isn't clearly established and supported in the existing documents, and that any new beneficiary added at this stage without a long paper trail will be vulnerable. Then we start building the paper trail, Arthur said. Who are we talking about? A woman named Maya Reyes. She lives 2 doors down from me. He paused. I'm not going to explain this in a way that makes sense on a phone call, Marcus. Come Thursday, bring the original documents. All of them, and I mean all of them, including whatever is in Eleanor's original estate file. Another pause. The green file? Arthur's hand tightened on the phone. The green file. Eleanor's personal documents, separate from the estate, things she had designated as personal effects rather than legal instruments. He had not asked Marcus to retrieve it in 11 years. The green file, he said. Yes, that same week, across town, in a corner office on the 38th floor of a building on Wacker Drive, Derek Hale sat across from a company accountant who had flagged an unusual pattern in a minor expense report, a cashier's check trail, 3 months of rental payments, an address in Wicker Park. Derek looked at the address for a long moment, then looked at the accountant. Don't mention this to anyone, Derek said quietly. I'll look into it myself. He began, that week, to make inquiries about Maya Reyes. It was a Sunday in mid-March, late afternoon, golden-grey light coming through the alley window, when Arthur came back from a walk to find a sticky note on his door handle. Made too much arroz con pollo. 4E if you want some. No obligation. He knocked on 4E. Maya opened the door in a flour-dusted apron. Lucia immediately visible at the kitchen table with a crayon and an impressive spread of paper. The apartment smelled like something Arthur hadn't smelled in many years. Not the restaurant-quality food of hotel dining rooms, not the careful cuisine of catered business dinners, but food cooked by someone at home for people they loved. He stayed for dinner. He stayed while Lucia showed him a drawing of a horse that she insisted was also a dragon, and he agreed that it was unambiguously both. He stayed while Maya told him, over dishes they washed together in the narrow kitchen, about the supervisor situation, that she had spoken to the department head, that the personal days had been noted but not penalized, that she was, as she put it, still standing. He stayed until Lucia fell asleep on the couch in the particular sudden way of children, without negotiation, and Maya carried her to bed. When she came back to the kitchen, she found Arthur standing at the bookshelf in the living room. He had placed something there while she was in the other room, set it on the second shelf between a paperback novel and a small picture frame, and was now standing back looking at it. It was a small, brown, cloth-covered book, a collection of Mary Oliver poems, first edition, spines slightly cracked at the place where someone had opened it many times to the same page. Maya looked at the book, then at him. Walter, is that? It belonged to someone who would have liked you very much, Arthur said. He said it simply, as a fact, without elaborating. I'd like you to have it, if that's not strange. Maya picked it up carefully. She opened it to the most worn page. Wild Geese, the poem, the lines beginning, "You do not have to be good." She read the first stanza in silence, and something crossed her face that was not quite understanding, but was adjacent to it. A recognition of something the poem said that she had known without having words for. She closed the book gently. "It's not strange," she said. "Thank you." She did not ask him to explain. He did not explain. They stood in the small living room for a moment in the easy silence of people who have begun to trust each other without ceremony. What neither of them noticed was the book's inside front cover, where Eleanor Hale had written her name in 1988. Eleanor A. Hale. In the same precise, left-leaning handwriting that Arthur read when he needed to remember why he was still trying. A brooch, a book, and a secret only one of them knew. 6 months pass quickly when you're not watching the clock. Arthur had not watched a clock with any urgency since Eleanor died, and for the first time in that 11-year stretch, the passage of time felt like something other than loss. It felt, on certain mornings, walking back from the lake with his coffee, or sitting at Maya's kitchen table while Lucia read out loud from a library book she'd chosen specifically because the main character had a horse. Like something that was filling rather than emptying. He was aware with the precise self-awareness of a man who had spent decades reading rooms and people, and the gaps between what was said and what was meant, that this was a dangerous thing to notice. He was 74 years old. Maya was 29. The shape of the connection between them was not one that fit any category he had language for. Not romantic, not fatherly, not the formal relation of mentor and protege, but something more essentially human than any of those. Something that preceded category the way certain kinds of kindness precede reason. He let it be what it was. The summer passed in small moments. Lucia learned to ride a bike in the narrow park 3 blocks east, Arthur walking beside her with one hand hovering near the seat and never touching it, until the morning she pedaled 12 feet without falling and turned around with an expression of absolute astonishment at herself. Maya photographed this. Arthur stood on the path in the morning light with his hands in his cardigan pockets and felt something in his chest that he recognized, from a great distance, as joy. In July, he learned that Maya had been offered a full-time position at Cook County Health, a promotion from the part-time administrative role to a coordinator position in patient services. The salary increase was significant enough that she could drop one of her 2 jobs. She called her mother in El Paso to tell her, and he could hear through the thin wall the bright sound of her mother's voice rising in celebration, a sound that carried and did not need translation. In August, Maya noticed something. She did not say anything immediately. She was observant in the same patient way that careful people are observant. She registered things and let them sit and came back to them later when she'd had time to decide what they meant. What she noticed across the span of a week was a collection of small discrepancies that individually meant nothing and collectively suggested a gap between who Walter Crane presented himself to be and who he actually was. His phone, which he occasionally left on the kitchen table at her apartment during dinner, was not the phone of a retired widower living on a pension. It was the latest model, current year, the type that costs more than many people's monthly rent. When she accidentally knocked it off the table once, the case came loose, and on the back of the phone, in small block letters, was engraved AJH, HHG. She put the case back on and said nothing. She noticed that he knew, with unusual precision, the renovation costs of a major hotel near the Magnificent Mile. Not as general knowledge, but as specific knowledge, the kind you have when the numbers passed across your desk. She noticed that his hands, while aged, had never done physical labor. The particular smoothness of hands that have worked exclusively with paper and handshakes, not unlike the corporate attorneys she occasionally processed paperwork for at the hospital. She noticed that when she mentioned the Hale Grand Chicago one evening, in passing, because a patient's family member she'd helped had left her a thank you note on hotel stationery, Arthur's expression changed very briefly, a tightening that was gone almost as fast as it appeared. She filed all of this away and waited. In September, the filing became relevant. A colleague at the hospital, a woman named Dominique who managed the media relations for the county health system, came to find Maya at her desk one afternoon with her phone held out, showing an article from a Chicago business blog. The article was short, anonymously sourced, and its headline was, "Is Arthur Hale's mystery Wicker Park companion a gold digger or a good Samaritan?" Maya read it. The article contained no names except hers, her full name, her employer, her address. It described her as a healthcare worker with a history of financial instability who had cultivated a close relationship with the Hale Hospitality founder over recent months. It quoted an anonymous source described as a person familiar with the Hale family, who expressed concern about the influence of an outside party on a vulnerable elderly man. Maya read it twice. Then she set the phone face down on Dominique's desk. "You okay?" Dominique said. "I need a minute," Maya said. She went to the women's restroom on the 3rd floor and stood at the sink with the water running, looking at herself in the mirror. She was, and this surprised her slightly, because she was not a person who avoided her own emotional reactions. Furious. Not frightened, not humiliated, though both of those were present underneath. Furious. Because the article was a specific kind of weapon. One that looked like concern while functioning as a threat, and one that had almost certainly not written itself. She dried her hands. She went back to her desk. She did not call Walter Crane. She thought carefully over the following 3 days about what she knew and what it meant. She thought about the phone. She thought about AJH, HHG. She thought about the Mary Oliver book, the way he had said it belonged to someone who would have liked you very much, and the way she had felt reading that poem, like someone had left a door open in a wall she hadn't known was there. She thought about the fact that the most important thing she felt about Walter Crane, or whoever he actually was that she trusted him. Not because he was rich or powerful or whatever the article implied she had discovered and was leveraging. Because he was the only person who had ever sat at her kitchen table and made Lucia feel like her dragon horse drawing was genuinely worthy of serious critical attention. Because he had carried the Mary Oliver book in his pocket for reasons she didn't know and had given it away for reasons he hadn't explained. And both of those were true at once, and neither cancelled the other. She decided to ask him directly. She knocked on 4C on a Wednesday evening in early October, when Lucia was at a sleepover 2 floors down. Arthur opened the door in his cardigan, holding a glass of water, and looked at her face and understood immediately that something had shifted. "Come in," he said. "Sit down." She sat. She put her hands flat on the kitchen table, an unconscious gesture, the kind you make when you want to demonstrate that you have nothing to hide and are about to ask for the same. "Walter, I need you to tell me who you are." Arthur set the glass of water on the counter. He turned and looked at her for a long moment. Not with the evaluating looks you might have feared, but with something else, something that had the quality of relief. "My name is Arthur Hale," he said. He watched her face. She was quiet. Not shocked, he realized, but confirming. She had already known, or suspected. That was somehow worse and better simultaneously. Worse because it meant the deception had not worked. Better because it meant she had stayed anyway. "Okay," she said after a moment. "Why?" He pulled out the chair across from her and sat. "Because my wife asked me to go somewhere ordinary and let someone surprise me. Because I've been testing people for 50 years and nobody ever surprised me." He paused. "You surprised me." "The milk crate," she said. "Yes." She looked at the table. The article. I've seen it. It wasn't me. I know it wasn't you. She said this simply. It was someone who knows about us and wants to make it complicated. My son, Arthur said. His name is Derek. He manages the eastern operations of the company. He stopped, started again. He will do what he believes is necessary to protect what he considers his. Maya was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "What do you want from me, actually? Not as a test, not as whatever this has been. What do you want?" And Arthur, who had answered this question in boardrooms and courtrooms and over negotiating tables, who had always known precisely and without hesitation what he wanted, sat at the kitchen table in a rented apartment in Wicker Park and said, "I want you to know that I think you are the most genuinely decent person I've met in a very long time. And I want that to mean something. I don't know what shape it takes. I'm aware that I don't have unlimited time to figure that out." Maya looked at him for a long time. "Okay," she said finally. "Okay." "Okay, meaning I'm not going anywhere," she said. "Meaning I'm not scared of your son. Meaning I don't want your money, which I suspect you've already figured out." She paused. "Meaning Lucia will be very upset if she can't see you anymore, because I'm also aware that she has started calling you Abuelo Walter in her head, even though she has not said it out loud yet." Arthur felt his throat tighten in the specific way that tends to precede something embarrassing for a man who has not cried in 11 years. He reached into his cardigan pocket. He placed the silver brooch on the table between them, the branch, the seed pearls, the small weight of 30 years of Eleanor's winters. "This belonged to my wife," he said. "She wore it on her winter coats. She was very much like you. Not in appearance, in the thing you have that I don't have a word for." He pushed the brooch gently across the table. "She would have wanted you to have it. I'm certain of that." Maya looked at the brooch for a long moment without touching it. Then she picked it up and turned it in her fingers. "Someone who loved people like you do wanted you to have this," she said softly. "That's what you said on the milk crate. I wondered." "You remembered that?" "I remember everything you've said to me," she said with the matter-of-fact sincerity of someone for whom this is not a romantic declaration, but a simple statement of fact. "You're a good talker when you try." She pinned the brooch to her jacket collar. It looked, Arthur thought, exactly right, as though it had been waiting. That same week, Marcus Webb met with Arthur in the Hale Grand's private suite, the one where no one from the company would see them. Marcus brought a folder that Arthur had not asked for since the week of Eleanor's funeral. "I found something in the green file," Marcus said. He set a single photocopy on the table. "This was with Eleanor's personal papers. I don't think you've seen this. It's not the page you found in the poetry book. This appears to be from an earlier entry. I think it was filed separately, probably by your housekeeper after Eleanor passed. It wasn't in the main notebook." Arthur picked up the photocopy. It was Eleanor's handwriting, unmistakable, precise, slightly left-leaning. The date at the top was 18 months before her death. He read it again. He set it face down on the table and looked at the window for a long moment. "Marcus," he said, "is the original notebook still in the estate inventory?" Marcus's expression shifted very carefully. "Arthur, I need to tell you something. When I went to retrieve the notebook from the estate archive, it was listed as present in the inventory log. But when I physically pulled the box, the notebook was there. But 2 pages had been removed. Cleanly. Recently, based on the condition of the spine damage." The room was very quiet. "Derek has access to the estate archive," Arthur said. Not a question. "He has had a key since Eleanor's death," Marcus said. Arthur looked at the face-down photocopy on the table. He did not pick it up again. "Change the locks," he said. "On the archive, today. And Marcus, I want the trust revision completed by the end of the month, whatever it takes." Marcus nodded. "There's something else you should know," he said. "The article about Maya. I've traced it to a PR firm that has done work for Derek's division in the past. I can't prove authorship, but the sourcing pattern is distinctive." "I know," Arthur said. He called Marcus from the elevator going down. One more thing, the trust revision. I want to add a specific provision. A letter attached to the trust documents, not the will. Addressed to Maya directly. Personal, not legal. He paused. I'll write it myself. That evening, for the first time in 11 years, Arthur Hale opened a desk drawer, took out a piece of paper, uncapped a pen, and began to write a letter to a woman who had not yet read the one his wife had left for her. He wrote for 2 hours. He threw away 4 drafts. The 5th he kept. Then he opened another drawer and took out the copy of Eleanor's journal page that Marcus had given him, the one from 18 months before her death, and read it one more time before folding it precisely and placing it inside an envelope he sealed and wrote Marcus Webb's office address on in block letters. Outside, the first real snow of winter was coming down, quiet and steady, the way it falls in Chicago when it means it. And somewhere 2 doors down, a child was being read to, and the heat was running in the radiator and clicking at intervals. And the city was doing what cities do, which is carry everyone forward, whether they are ready or not. What Eleanor wrote. There's a moment in every story like this one, and I've told enough of them to know it well, where the thing that everyone has been moving toward arrives before anyone is ready. Not dramatically, not announced. It arrives the way the most important things usually do. Quietly, in an ordinary room, while something ordinary was just about to happen. Arthur Hale's second heart attack came on a February morning when he was doing nothing more momentous than making coffee. The coffee was instant. He had not abandoned the instant coffee, despite Maya's continued, gentle campaign against it. And he was standing at the counter in 4C, in his cardigan, watching the snow outside the alley window, when a pain opened in his chest, like a door kicked in. He made it to the chair. He made it, barely, to his phone. And Marcus Webb, who had the particular quality of long-time loyal people who answer on the second ring regardless of the hour, answered on the second ring. He was at Northwestern Memorial within 40 minutes. Maya arrived at the hospital 11 minutes after Marcus called her, still in her work badge and winter coat. Lucia dropped at the neighbors with a speed that suggested this was not the first crisis she had navigated in transit. She found Marcus Webb in the waiting room, looking exactly like a man who has not permitted himself to show what he is feeling, and she sat down next to him and said nothing for a while, which was exactly correct. Arthur did not lose consciousness. This was important to him. He was conscious and alert and aware, in the specific way of a man who understands that his time is not infinite, and has begun to run the mathematics of what is left and what remains unfinished. He asked, from his bed, with a blood pressure cuff on his arm and an IV in his hand, for 3 things: Marcus, Maya, and the black briefcase from his apartment. Specifically, from the top shelf of the closet in the bedroom, there was a case, not a briefcase, a flat lockbox, the kind with a dial combination. He told Maya the combination. She brought it herself, taking a cab across town and back. She set it on the tray beside his bed without asking what was in it, because she had learned, in 11 months of knowing Arthur Hale, that he would tell her what she needed to know when he needed to tell it. The doctors spoke about stents and rest and a procedure scheduled for the following week. Arthur agreed to everything they said with the cooperative attention of a man who has decided to stay in this body a while longer because there are things left to do. Marcus handled the procedure. Arthur handled the rest. In the hospital room, 2 days after the heart attack, with Lucia temporarily present and drawing horses that were also dragons in the corner with crayons from a gift shop bag Maya had produced from somewhere. Arthur told Marcus to open the lockbox. He gave Marcus a key, not from the lockbox, from the silver brooch. Maya looked up. The brooch has a false back, Arthur said, looking at her. Eleanor had it made that way. I didn't know until I found the letter she left me. It's been there the whole time you've been wearing it. Maya unpinned the brooch from her jacket collar and, guided by Arthur's quiet instructions, pressed the back hinge. A small key fell onto her palm. The key to the lockbox, she said. The key to both things, Arthur said. The box in the hospital and... Marcus, the green file. From the lockbox, Marcus withdrew an envelope. Not the trust documents, not anything legal, but a plain white envelope with Maya's name written on it in Arthur's handwriting. He withdrew a second envelope, sealed, old, cream-coloured, with Arthur written on it in handwriting that was not Arthur's. Maya's eyes moved to the cream envelope. She looked at Arthur. "That's Eleanor's handwriting," she said, not a question. She had seen it in the book's front cover, that same precise tilt. "Yes," he said. Marcus found it in the estate archive with the journal. It was filed with her personal papers. It has never been opened. He paused. "I'm asking you to open it. Not because it addresses you, it addresses me. But I want a witness who isn't a lawyer." Lucia looked up briefly from her drawing and then back down, with the easy trust of a child who knows that when her mother's face is calm, there is nothing to be afraid of. Maya opened the envelope. She read it in silence. It took perhaps 3 minutes. Her face moved in ways that Arthur could not entirely read. Something in the early lines that softened, something in the middle that tightened, and then, at the end, a stillness that was the stillness of a person absorbing something too large to react to quickly. She set the letter on the bed beside Arthur's hand. She did not speak immediately. Arthur read the letter. He had not read it before, despite having carried it from the hospital room in memory for months. And his face did what it had not done in 11 years. And the room was quiet enough that Lucia, without looking up from her drawing, simply moved across the room and put her hand on his arm and went back to her drawing. And Arthur let her, which was perhaps the most dignified grief any of us will ever witness. The letter said, and I will not quote it in full because Eleanor's words belong to Arthur and to Maya and to the room they were read in, that Eleanor had known, in her last year, that Arthur would be alone and would not know how to stop being alone. That she had written a description in her journal of the person she hoped he would find. Not a romantic love, she had written, but the kind of person who makes you remember how to be human. That she had described specific qualities, that she believed, as she had always believed, that the world was arranged more intentionally than it appeared, and that if Arthur would go somewhere ordinary and let himself be surprised, the arrangement would become visible. She had also written this. "Derek has read this letter. I know because I left it where he would find it if he looked, and Derek always looks. I am telling you so that you will not be surprised when he tries to prevent what I'm asking you to do. He is frightened, not wicked. Love him anyway, but don't let the fear win." Arthur closed his eyes. "She knew," Maya said quietly. "She knew everything," Arthur said. "She always did." Lucia finished her drawing and held it up. It was a horse. "This one is just a horse," she said seriously, "for when you feel better." Arthur was discharged 11 days later. The procedure had gone well. He was told to rest, to walk slowly, to take his medications, to avoid significant stress. He found this instruction, delivered by a physician with a kind face and a Northwestern lanyard, to be optimistic under the circumstances. He moved back to the Hale ground for his recovery, at Maya's insistence. The 4th floor walk-up was not appropriate, she said, with the specific firmness of someone who has framed a non-negotiable as a practical observation. He went. Marcus came every morning. Maya and Lucia came 3 evenings a week, which meant those evenings the suite smelled like food cooked by someone who meant it, which was the best possible thing for a recovery. On a Thursday in late February, 2 weeks after the hospital, the snow still present on the ground outside the hotel's tall windows, Marcus Webster Webb convened a reading of Arthur Hale's revised will and trust documents. He had contacted the appropriate parties with the appropriate legal notice. The meeting took place in a conference room on the hotel's 2nd floor. Derek Hale arrived with 2 attorneys. Maya arrived with no attorneys, because Arthur had told her that Marcus was hers to use if she wanted him. And she had said, "I know what's in the documents. I don't need someone to tell me what they say." She arrived with her work badge still clipped to her jacket and the silver brooch on her collar and the composure of someone who has decided in advance, that whatever is about to happen, she will not be the one who loses her dignity. Marcus read the documents. The relevant provisions were clear. The company controlling trust remained substantially as before in terms of operational control and primary beneficiary structure. However, a secondary trust, the Eleanor Hale Educational Foundation, newly established, had been funded with 15% of the estate's value, naming Maya Reyes as administrator and Lucia Reyes as a primary scholarship recipient alongside the broader foundation mission. Additionally, the letter Arthur had written, the one from the lockbox, was entered into the record as a personal statement of intent, not a legal instrument, but part of the documented history of the trust's founding. Derek listened to all of this with the controlled stillness of a man who has prepared himself for something and is now experiencing the gap between preparation and reality. His attorneys made notes. When Marcus finished, Derek's lead attorney spoke first, raising the expected legal challenges, undue influence, capacity questions, the timeline of the revised documents relative to the medical events, standard language, professionally delivered. Then Derek spoke. He looked at Maya directly, for the first time in the meeting, and his voice when he spoke was controlled and cold, and carrying something underneath the control that was not quite what it presented itself as. I want to be very clear, Derek said. My father is 74 years old. He has had 2 cardiac events in the past year, and he met you while wearing a disguise outside a sandwich shop. I am not suggesting you're a criminal. I'm suggesting you're a woman who was in the right place at the right time and who has allowed a lonely, grieving old man to build a fantasy around her. My mother has been gone for 11 years. My father has not been well. And I intend to make sure that this revision is examined very carefully before a single dollar moves. The room was quiet. Maya looked at Derek. She looked at him the way she had looked at Arthur on the milk crate 11 months ago. Directly, without performance, as though what she was seeing was simply a person, and she was deciding what that person needed. Mr. Hale, she said, I know about the journal pages. Derek's face did not move. I know your mother wrote about you in the journal. I know she wrote that you had read the letter she left for your father. I know she said you were frightened, not wicked. She paused. I'm not your enemy. I didn't come here to take anything from you. I came here because your father asked me to, and because I believe what he believed, which is that your mother was right about most things. Derek was silent for a long moment. Something moved across his face, one brief, specific instant, and then it was gone, replaced again by the careful, composed blankness of a man who has decided that control is the only safe thing left to him. My attorneys will be in touch, he said. He stood and left the room, and his attorneys followed, and the door closed, and Maya looked at Marcus, and Marcus looked at his hands, and the threat was still in the room, hanging in the air like smoke, entirely unresolved. Maya sat very still for a moment. Then she reached up and touched the brooch on her collar. She could feel the small seam of the hinge on the back, the hidden door, the small key, the thing Eleanor had hidden inside something beautiful. She was holding something she didn't ask for, couldn't return, and had no language for yet. She thought, this isn't over. She was correct. What she built with what he left. Arthur Hale died on a Sunday morning in April, 6 weeks after the conference room, while the light was coming through the hotel window at the angle that made the dust in the air look like something intentional. He died in the suite, in the chair by the window, not the hospital, not a machine, not surrounded by anyone in scrubs, but in his own chair, with his coffee on the side table and a Mary Oliver poem open on his lap, the page worn at the fold the way pages get when someone has returned to them many times over many years. Marcus had visited the previous evening. Maya and Lucia had been there the afternoon before, Lucia monopolizing the desk chair for a drawing session, while Arthur and Maya talked quietly about things that were not the will, not Derek, not lawyers, about Eleanor's garden in the house on the North Shore, about Maya's mother in El Paso, about whether Lucia's horse-drawing phase would eventually expand into other animals, or whether horses were a permanent specialization. He died the way people die, when they have decided, finally, that they have done what they came to do. Not dramatically, just finished. Marcus received the call at 7:43 in the morning and sat very still with the phone in his hand for approximately 1 minute before he began making the calls that needed to be made. One of them was to Maya. She cried in the stairwell of her building for 11 minutes, which is how long she cried. And then she washed her face and called her mother. And then she called the neighbor who watched Lucia and asked, without explanation, if Lucia could stay for a few hours. And the neighbor said yes, the way neighbors in the Flores building always said yes, which was without asking why. She went to the hotel. She sat with Arthur in the chair for a while, which is a strange thing to do, and also the most natural thing in the world. She said, "You were supposed to tell me where the good instant coffee was." She said, "I'm going to be all right. I want you to know that." She held his hand, which was already cold. And it was the same hand she had looked at on the milk crate 11 months ago, and thought, this man has never done manual labor in his life. And she was right about that, and wrong about everything else. 8 months later, on a grey October morning, Maya Reyes sat across a conference table from Derek Hale for the second time. The room was different, a mediation suite on the 19th floor of a building on LaSalle Street, chosen by the mediator because it had a window that looked at the sky and not at another building, which the mediator believed made people easier. Maya had found, in the month since Arthur's death, that this was not universally true, but she appreciated the intention. Derek was there with one attorney this time, not two. His face had aged in 8 months in the visible way that grief ages people who refuse to acknowledge they are grieving. He looked like a man who had been fighting something internal for a long time and was very tired. His attorney began with the formal challenge language, the same framework as the conference room, the same procedural architecture of undue influence and capacity and timeline. Maya's attorney, a woman named Ruth Chen, who Marcus had recommended, and who had the specific quality of a person who says exactly what she means and nothing else, responded with documents. The full record of Arthur's revised trust documents, dated 14 months before his death. The letter from the lockbox, now properly entered. The correspondence trail between Arthur and Marcus during the period in question, which demonstrated a pattern of deliberate and consistent intent, sustained over more than a year. The statement of a building manager in Wicker Park, who confirmed that a man paying in cashier's checks had rented an apartment in full cognitive health, discussing building policies and lease terms in detail. Medical records confirming that the cardiac events post-dated the trust revisions, not predated them. And one more thing. Marcus Webb, who had attended as a witness and not as counsel, set a folder on the table. Inside was the original journal, recovered from the estate archive after the locks were changed, with the 2 removed pages reinserted, photographically authenticated from copies Eleanor's own estate attorney had retained in a separate file that Derek had not known existed. The removed pages contained Eleanor's description of the person she hoped Arthur would find. Written 4 years before Arthur sat on a milk crate on North Milwaukee Avenue. Written with the specific and unhurried care of someone who believes in the world's arrangements. Derek's attorney stopped speaking. Derek looked at the journal. He looked at it for a long time, in the way you look at something you have been trying not to see. "Those pages were in my mother's personal files," Derek said. His voice was flat in a way that meant something was moving underneath it. "I had them." "Yes," Marcus said. "I took them because—" He stopped, started again. "She wrote about me, in the surrounding entries. She wrote that she knew I took after Arthur, that we were the same in the ways that hurt people, that she loved me and was—" His jaw tightened. She was disappointed. The room was quiet. "She also wrote," Marcus said quietly, "that she believed you were capable of more than you'd chosen. That's in the same entry. Both things are true at once." Derek looked at his hands on the table. Something moved across his face, brief, recognizable, The same expression Maya had seen in the conference room 8 months ago. The one that came and went too fast to be a decision, but too real to be nothing. He was 46 years old, and he had the look of a man who has just read something in his dead mother's handwriting that he cannot unread. He looked at Maya for the first time since the mediation began. "Did you know?" he said. "From the beginning, did you know who he was?" Maya looked at him steadily. "I knew he was cold and hungry," she said. "That was enough." Derek was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded once, the way you nod when a thing is true and you recognize it and you don't have anything to add. "I'm not withdrawing the challenge," his attorney said quickly. "Yes, I am," Derek said. His attorney looked at him. "Withdraw it," Derek said. He gathered the papers in front of him and stood, and he looked, Maya thought, like a man who was lighter for having put something down. He didn't apologize. She hadn't expected him to. Apologies from people like Derek came, if they came at all, in the form of action rather than language, and sometimes not at all. And both of those things were between Derek and his own conscience. At the door, he paused. He looked back at Maya, and what was in his expression then was not warmth. It was too early for warmth, but it was recognition. One human being recognizing another. "She would have liked you," he said. "My mother." "I know," Maya said. "I'm glad." He left. Ruth Chen looked at Maya. "That could have gone a lot of different ways." "Yes," Maya said. "It could have. There is a thing that happens when you decline money you could take. The world, which has a specific relationship with money, does not always understand this." The press coverage in the week after the mediation fell into two camps. The camp that called Maya Reyes a saint, and the camp that called her calculation disguised as virtue. And both camps were, in the particular way of camps, less interested in what she actually did than in what her doing it said about their existing opinions. A woman on the evening news called it the most elaborate long con in Chicago philanthropy history. A morning radio host called it a beautiful story about the power of genuine kindness. Neither of them called her first. Maya, who had been living in 4E on Honoré Street for 10 years and had developed, through the specific education of being a woman without resources in a city that rewards resources, a very clear-eyed understanding of her own motivations, told Lucia that night, "People are going to say a lot of things. Let them. You know what happened. I know what happened. That's enough." Lucia, who was 7 now, and had recently expanded her drawing repertoire to include dogs, accepted this with the equanimity of a child raised by a woman who has never performed her integrity for an audience. The Eleanor Hale Educational Foundation was formally established in the first week of November, with Maya as administrator and Ruth Chen as legal counsel. The foundation's first cohort of scholarship applicants, selected from public schools in Chicago's west and northwest sides, the neighborhoods where Arthur had walked every morning for 9 months, watching a city carry people forward, numbered 41. One scholarship per school year names the Eleanor A. Hale Award for Student Promise, carrying a note in the selection criteria that read, "Demonstrated care for others, even when it costs something personal." Maya did not move from the Flores building for 3 more years. She kept the apartment with the curling linoleum and the clicking radiator, and 4C remained locked, and she paid the rent herself, and when the building manager offered to reduce it in deference to her new circumstances, she declined. She accepted one thing from the estate that was not in the documents: a first edition Mary Oliver poetry collection, with a name written inside the front cover in precise left-leaning handwriting. She read it often. She read the most worn page especially. Wild Geese, the poem that begins, "You do not have to be good," and ends by telling you that the world calls to you like a river, and you don't have to be lonely. The last thing I want to tell you about happened in a building lobby on the North Shore of Chicago, in the spring of a year about a decade after a Tuesday on a milk crate in Wicker Park. Lucia Reyes, 20 years old, second year at Northwestern on a scholarship that bore her mother's name in the secondary documentation, though not the official one. Art history major with a minor in education policy. Current specialization, watercolor and governance of small non-profit organizations. Was leading a group of first-year students through the lobby of the Hale Grand Chicago as part of a partnership program between the hotel and the university's philanthropic leadership initiative. The hotel lobby contained, among its art, a small framed letter displayed in a case between two large windows. Not a famous letter, not signed by anyone famous. Just a letter from a woman named Eleanor Hale to her husband, written in 1998, which had been donated to the hotel's permanent collection by the Eleanor Hale Educational Foundation, with the following caption. A note about what to look for. Lucia stopped the group in front of it. She had given this tour 17 times. She always stopped here. This woman, she said to the students gathered around her, wrote this letter 25 years ago about someone she hadn't met yet. She described what this person would be like, what they would do, how they would show up. And then, years later, that person showed up. She paused. My mum didn't know she was the person in the letter until she'd already been herself for 2 years. She looked at the letter in its case. That's the thing I want you to think about going into this program. You don't know who's watching. You don't know what your choices look like from outside your own life. But someone, somewhere, is writing you down. One student raised a hand. What happened to the son, Arthur's son? Lucia glanced at him. He runs the Eastern operations of the company still. He and my mum have coffee once a year. It's awkward, but it's something. The student nodded. Another student was looking at the letter closely, at the handwriting, at the precise, slightly left-leaning tilt of Eleanor Hale's words. She sounds like she knew everything before it happened. She knew some things, Lucia said. She didn't know my mum would pin her brooch on her jacket and walk around wearing it for a year without knowing what was inside it. She smiled a little. I think she would have loved that part. She looked at the letter one more time, the way you look at something you know well and find new in each looking. And then she turned to the group. Okay, let's talk about the foundation model. The lobby filled with the movement of young people following a young woman who knew exactly where she was going. And the letter stayed in its case, between the windows, in the light, in the lobby of a hotel named for a man who learned, late and not easily, that the most important things cannot be built, only found. When you go somewhere ordinary and let yourself be surprised. There's a silver brooch in Maya Reyes's jewelry box, branch-shaped, seed pearls, with a hinge at the back that holds a small key that no longer opens anything. She wears it on her winter coats, the way Eleanor Hale wore it on hers for 30 years. Sometimes Lucia wears it instead. She borrowed it for her first day of sophomore year and forgot to give it back, and Maya has not asked for it, because some things are meant to move forward. The brooch doesn't know it crossed 2 generations, and opened a lock and sat inside a pocket for 11 years of grief before it was ready to be given away. It is just a brooch. It is just silver, just pearls, just the shape of a branch in winter, bare and cold, and still somehow suggesting spring. I think Eleanor would have said that's enough. I think she'd say that's more than enough. She always thought the small things were the point. She was right. Thank you for being here for this one. If this story found you in a hard week, or reminded you of someone you've been missing, or made you think about the last time you sat down next to a stranger and chose to stay, I'm really glad. Leave a comment, tell me where you're watching from, and if this story meant something to you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. I'll see you in the next story. Take good care of each other.